everyone, Danielle here with another video for a blog named Hero. This week I tried something new and it actually worked, so I figured I'd go ahead and make a little video and share it with you all. Now this could be something that you've already tried, but it was new to me, so I figured it's got to be new to at least one other person. And I'm going to be using this butterfly stamp from the Hero Art Studio Calico set called Calico Borders. This is one of my new favorite sets from them. And I had used it and made this card earlier in the week, and my vision for the card was to have the butterflies in white against a backdrop with a splash of color. And so to do this, I just had some watercolor paper and my distress markers, and I colored the back and then stamped and cut out the butterflies from a separate sheet of paper. And it worked just fine, but cutting out the butterflies was a little bit tedious and time consuming, and I thought it would have been really nice if the butterflies were a solid image and I could have just stamped and clear embossed the whole thing and then painted over it. So I thought maybe I could kind of fake that by using the open butterfly stamp where just the outline shows up and coloring it in with my Versamarker watermark pen. Now, if you're not familiar with this, it's the same ink that you would find in your Versamark ink pad. It's that same tacky ink that you use for embossing, except it's in a marker form. And I got mine at Michael's, but you can also get it at Simon Says Stamp, so I will link to it below. And I'm going to use VersaFine ink as well, because I do want the embossing powder to stick to the butterflies, and so I know that the VersaFine will stay wet longer. And as far as paper, I'm going to be using this watercolor paper from Simon Says Stamp, and it has a smooth side and a more textured side, and I prefer to stamp and work with the smoother side. That's just my personal preference, although it stamps just fine on either of the two sides. And so I'm going to go ahead, and before I do any of my stamping, I'm going to go in with my powder embossing, kind of embossing buddy, and this is just going to help to prevent any embossing powder from sticking to the paper in areas that I don't want it to stick to. So I'm just going to go ahead and be really liberal and generous and apply this all over the place, and then I'm going to stamp my butterflies. And as usual, I'm not going to use my ruler. I'm just going to try and eyeball it and center it as best I can, because I am going to be using this whole panel for the front of my card. So once I've stamped my butterflies, I'm going to go in with my marker, and it has a pen tip and a brush tip, and I'm going to be using the brush tip just because the pen tip's really fine and it would probably take me days to color in all these butterflies. One tip, if you're going to be using VersaFine ink like I did, you want to be careful not to touch it with the marker because the black ink will smear and bleed. But if you use Memento, then you probably shouldn't have any problems. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of take my time because you can't really see where the ink is going down since it's clear. You just want to be careful to get as close to the edges as you can without touching them, obviously. And it does stay tacky for a while, just like your regular Versamark ink, so you don't have to work super fast. You do have a nice little window of time. I'm just going to go ahead and touch up any areas that I think maybe I didn't get close enough to the edge. And if you kind of lift it up and tilt it, you can see where the ink was placed, so that's helpful. And I'm just going to go ahead now and completely cover it with embossing powder, and I'm going to hope that it sticks. And if you don't keep your embossing powders in these Tupperware containers, I highly recommend it. It's a lot easier for controlling mess. Not to say that I still don't make a mess with my embossing powders, because I do, but this just helps to kind of keep it a little bit more contained. And I'll tap off any extra, and I don't know if you can see it that well, but the butterflies as well as the outline of the butterflies are completely coated with the clear embossing powder. So yay, it worked. And now I'm just going to get out my embossing gun, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that all the embossing powder is really melted well, because I am going to be watercoloring over top of this. And one thing that I did notice when I emboss on this watercolor paper is that it tends to warp quite a bit. Even though I went and tried to zap the back of it with my heat gun to fix it, it doesn't really work because it's very thick. So what I usually do is, if I have time, I'll just kind of sit it overnight with a block or a book on top of it, and that usually flattens it out. And I just picked a couple of my distress markers. I've Chipped Sapphire, Dusty Concord, and Tumbled Glass. And when I use these, you can color directly onto your paper with them, but when I'm doing watercoloring, I prefer to color a little bit on my acrylic blocks, and then I will use my paintbrush or my water pen to pick up the color that way and then color with it. I find that I just have a little bit more control and it blends a little bit more evenly when I do it like this, as opposed to coloring directly on the paper and then trying to paint over it with the water. And this is a really cool water brush pen from Tim Holtz, and this is the smaller detailer brush, I think it's called, and it's nice. You just fill it with water, and it has a little spot where you push and more water flow will come out. So it's nice, you don't have to keep dipping into a cup of water, although you can certainly just use a regular old paintbrush too. It works just as well. And so I'm just going to kind of go in now and play around with the distress colors until I get a look that I'm pretty happy with. And you could either zap this with a heat gun to speed up the drying process or just leave it as is and let it dry. And you want to go in with a paper towel just over top of the butterflies where you emboss them, because there's going to be a little bit of color sitting on the top, and just wipe it off. And one thing that I learned was that you want to, it would have been much easier to use a Q-tip, but you want to at least roll your paper towel up and try to stick to just wiping the butterflies. Because if you actually wipe the watercolor paper before it dries, it will soak up some of the color and you'll end up with kind of white spots wherever the paper towel touched. I learned that the first time around, but a Q-tip, like I said, would be much better for doing this. And so I actually wiped up a little bit of the color over here, so I'm just going to go back with my brush and some color and fix any of the mistakes that I made. And there you go. So I'm pretty happy with how that has turned out, and I'll show you the two cards. Here's the one that I made earlier in the week where I stamped and cut out the butterflies and put them on top of the watercoloring. And here's the one that I just made now where I just stamped and clear embossed the butterflies and colored straight over top of them. And it looks pretty much the same. The only difference is that the one on the bottom with the blue is a little bit shiny. I wanted to try it with black as well, and so here's how that turned out. I was pretty happy. I didn't get close enough to the edges with the marker, but I kind of looked like the graphic look. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new. For more information and the current challenges, visit ablognamedhero.blogspot.com.